The gunshot echoed through the silent Montana night, sending a flock of startled crows into the darkening sky as Rachel Norton clutched her infant son William tighter to her chest, praying his cries wouldn't give away their hiding place among the restless chickens. It was the spring of 1876, and the life she'd once known had shattered like a mirror dropped on a hardwood floor, leaving her with nothing but a 3-month-old baby and the clothes on her back as she fled from the man who had promised to love her until death did them part. The coop smelled of dust and feathers, the chickens clucking nervously around her as she pressed herself into the darkest corner, her heart thundering so loudly she feared it might betray her position. Little William squirmed against her breast, his tiny face scrunched with discomfort as she tried to soothe him with gentle whispers. "Hush now, my sweet boy," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the nervous rustling of the birds. "We must be quiet." Rachel had been running for 3 days, ever since she had finally gathered the courage to flee from her husband's increasingly violent rages. Vernon Blackwood had seemed like such a gentleman when they'd first met at a town social in Billings 2 years earlier. Handsome, with a silver tongue and promises of a comfortable life, he had swept the 19-year-old Rachel off her feet, proposing marriage after a whirlwind courtship. But the charming facade had crumbled shortly after their wedding, revealing a man consumed by jealousy, drink, and an uncontrollable temper. When William had arrived, Rachel had hoped the baby might soften Vernon's heart. Instead, his rages only intensified, his paranoia growing until he began accusing her of unfaithfulness, claiming the child wasn't even his. The final straw had come 3 nights ago when Vernon had returned home from a 3-day drinking binge, his eyes wild with fury as he overturned furniture and smashed dishes. When he had turned his rage toward the cradle where William slept, Rachel had made her decision. She had waited until Vernon passed out, then gathered what little she could carry, took her mother's locket containing the last of her savings, and fled into the night. Now, as another gunshot pierced the evening air, Rachel fought back tears of desperation. She had thought she'd made it far enough, had believed she could reach her cousin's homestead in Helena before Vernon realized she was gone. But he had tracked her faster than she'd anticipated, and with night falling and her milk beginning to dry up from stress and lack of food, she feared for both their lives. William began to whimper again, his little face turning red with hunger and discomfort. Rachel tried to nurse him, but her anxiety had affected her milk supply, and the baby grew more frustrated, his cries growing louder despite her attempts to soothe him. "Please, William," she begged, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Please be quiet, my love." Outside the coop, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, and her blood turned to ice. Vernon had found them. This ramshackle homestead she'd stumbled upon had seemed abandoned, giving her hope for a night's rest before continuing her journey. Now it would become their tomb. William's cries grew louder, and the chickens scattered in alarm, feathers flying as they protested the intrusion. Rachel pressed herself further into the corner, her free hand searching desperately for anything she might use as a weapon. The door to the chicken coop suddenly swung open, and Rachel let out a small, involuntary cry of terror. But instead of Vernon's enraged face, she saw a tall stranger silhouetted against the twilight sky. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, and even in the dim light she could see he was covered in trail dust. "Hello," the man called softly, his deep voice carrying a note of concern rather than threat. "Is someone in here?" Rachel remained frozen, uncertain whether to reveal herself or stay hidden. William made the decision for her, letting out a loud, hungry wail that echoed through the small structure. The man stepped further into the coop, and as her eyes adjusted, Rachel could make out his features. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, visible now as he crouched down, were a striking blue that reminded her of the Montana sky. "Madam," he said gently, keeping his distance as he spotted her in the corner. "I don't mean to frighten you. This is my property." Rachel clutched William tighter, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please, sir, don't send us away. He'll kill us if he finds us." The man's expression softened as he took in the sight of her clutching the infant, Slowly, he removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "My name is Preston Thornton," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I own this ranch." "I heard the gunshots while I was riding back from town and came to investigate." He glanced at the baby, who had momentarily quieted at the sound of the new voice. "Are you running from someone, madam?" Rachel nodded, unable to stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "My husband, he's not right in the head. He drinks, and when he drinks, he gets violent. He threatened our baby, and I had to leave." Preston's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "You're safe now, both of you." He extended his hand slowly, as one might approach a spooked horse. "Let me help you to the house. You look like you could use a hot meal and somewhere proper to tend to your little one." Rachel hesitated, years of harsh lessons making her wary of male kindness. But William was hungry, she was exhausted, and she had nowhere else to go. Cautiously, she placed her hand in Preston's, feeling the calluses of a man who worked hard for his living. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her to her feet. "Can you walk?" he asked, noticing how she swayed slightly. "Yes, I think so," she replied, though her legs felt weak from miles of walking and too little food. Preston nodded, keeping a respectful distance as he led her from the coop toward a modest but well-maintained farmhouse about 100 yards away. As they walked, he kept scanning the horizon, his hand never straying far from the pistol at his hip. "Those shots I heard," he said quietly. "Was that him?" Rachel nodded, clutching William closer. "He's been tracking us since we left. I thought I'd lost him when I crossed the creek a few miles back, but don't you worry about that now," Preston assured her. "Nobody comes onto my land causing trouble without answering to me. Let's get you both inside and settled." The interior of Preston's home was simply furnished but clean and warm. A fire burned low in the hearth, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air. Rachel stood awkwardly just inside the door, suddenly aware of how filthy and bedraggled she must appear. Preston seemed to sense her discomfort. "There's a washroom through that door," he said, pointing. "And I can heat up some water for you and the little one. My sister left some clothes here last time she visited. They might be a bit large, but they're clean." "Your sister?" Rachel asked, a flicker of hope rising at the mention of another woman. "She lives in town with her husband now," Preston explained. "Comes by to check on me every few weeks, makes sure I haven't turned completely wild." He offered a small smile, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I don't want to impose," Rachel began, but Preston shook his head. "Madam, no offense, but you look about ready to collapse. Your baby needs you strong. Let me help, at least for tonight, and we can figure things out in the morning." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her completely. After months of walking on eggshells around Vernon, the simple decency of this stranger was almost too much to bear. "My name is Rachel," she said softly. "Rachel Norton, and this is William," Preston nodded. "It's a pleasure to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As he moved to the stove to heat water, Rachel noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Despite this, there was a fluid strength to his movements, the confidence of a man who knew his own capabilities. While Preston prepared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and bacon, Rachel took the opportunity to clean herself and William in the small washroom. The warm water was a luxury she hadn't experienced in days, and as she gently bathed her son, his fussing quieted to contented gurgles. The clothes Preston had offered, a simple cotton dress and a warm shawl, were indeed a bit large, but clean and smelling faintly of lavender. Rachel wondered about the sister who had left them behind, what kind of woman she was, and if she knew how kind her brother could be to strangers. When she emerged, feeling somewhat restored, Preston had set the table with 2 plates and a small bowl of warm milk. "I thought the milk might help with the little one," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "I remember my sister saying something about how babies sometimes need more than their mother's milk when times are hard." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought fresh tears to Rachel's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, settling at the table with William in her lap. They ate in companionable silence for a while, Rachel savoring each bite of the simple but filling meal. It was the first hot food she'd had since leaving, and she had to remind herself not to eat too quickly. How old is he? Preston asked eventually, nodding toward William, who was contentedly sucking on a corner of the shawl. 3 months, Rachel replied. He was born just after the first snow melted. Preston smiled. He seems strong, got a good grip on that shawl. He's a fighter, Rachel agreed, brushing a gentle finger over her son's downy head. Like his mother has to be now. Preston's expression turned serious. This husband of yours, would he really hurt his own child? Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. Vernon wasn't always cruel. When we first married, he could be so charming, so attentive. But the drinking, it changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he truly was all along. She looked down at William, who had fallen asleep against her breast. The night we left, he came home in a rage, claiming William wasn't his, that I'd been unfaithful. He knocked over the cradle with William in it, if I hadn't caught it. She couldn't finish the sentence. Preston's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. Some men don't deserve the title, he said quietly. What will you do now? I have a cousin in Helena, Rachel explained. I was trying to reach her when Vernon picked up our trail. I thought this place was abandoned when I found it. I just needed somewhere to rest for a night. Well, it seems Providence brought you here, Preston said. I was supposed to be gone until tomorrow, but one of my horses threw a shoe, so I had to cut my trip short. He hesitated, then added, You're welcome to stay until you've regained your strength. It's at least 3 days' ride to Helena, and that's on horseback without a baby in tow. Rachel wanted to decline, to insist she couldn't impose further, but the reality of her situation was impossible to ignore. She had barely any money left, William needed stability, and Vernon was still out there, possibly closing in on them even now. I can work, she offered. I know how to cook, clean, tend a garden. I won't be a burden. Preston shook his head. You don't need to earn your keep, Rachel. Not while you're recovering and caring for your son. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves of the house. William stirred in Rachel's arms but didn't wake. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. It's getting late, Preston said, rising from the table. You can take my room. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I couldn't possibly, Rachel began, but Preston raised a hand to stop her protest. I insist. The bed's clean, and there's a cradle in there that was mine when I was a baby. My pa made it, and all us Thornton children slept in it at one time or another. Your William might find it comfortable. The mention of a proper cradle for William was the final persuasion Rachel needed. She nodded gratefully, and Preston showed her to a simply furnished bedroom at the back of the house. True to his word, a beautifully crafted wooden cradle stood in one corner, its surface smooth from generations of use. Thank you, Preston, Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything, he nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest. We'll figure things out in the morning. As he turned to leave, Rachel called after him softly. Preston, those gunshots you heard, if Vernon is nearby. Don't worry about that tonight, Preston assured her. I'll keep watch. You and William are safe here. After he closed the door behind him, Rachel gently placed William in the cradle, marveling at how perfectly he fit in the handcrafted bed. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, she felt a glimmer of security as she slipped beneath the clean sheets of Preston's bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable, and the linens smelled of sunshine and open air. Outside, as Preston had promised, she could hear him moving about the main room, checking locks and occasionally stepping onto the porch to survey the darkness. The rhythmic sound of his movements became a lullaby, and despite her fears, Rachel found herself drifting into the deepest sleep she'd had since William was born. In the morning, Rachel woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the unfamiliar sensation of being well rested. For a moment, panic seized her as she realized William wasn't beside her, but then she heard his happy gurgling from the main room. Hastily pulling on the borrowed dress, Rachel emerged to find Preston sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, William propped carefully in the crook of his arm. The rancher was speaking softly to the baby, who stared up at him with fascination. I hope you don't mind, Preston said when he noticed her. I heard him fussing a while ago, and you were sleeping so soundly, I thought I'd let you rest. No, I don't mind, Rachel replied, surprised to find she truly didn't. Vernon had never shown any interest in holding their son, claiming it was woman's work. He's a good boy, Preston said, smiling down at William. Smart too. Keeps looking at everything like he's figuring out how it all works. Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest at the genuine admiration in Preston's voice. He is clever, she agreed, moving closer to take William from him. Thank you for letting me sleep. You needed it, Preston said simply, relinquishing the baby with careful hands. There's coffee on the stove, and I can fix up some breakfast if you're hungry. As they shared a meal of eggs and leftover biscuits, Preston outlined his plan. I've been thinking about your situation, he began cautiously. If your husband is as dangerous as you say, traveling alone to Helena isn't safe, especially with the little one. Rachel tensed, anticipating that he was about to ask her to leave anyway. I could escort you, Preston continued, surprising her. But first, I think we should give you some time to recover your strength. A few days here at least. I have work to do around the ranch that can't wait, but you'd be safe here while I'm tending to chores. Relief flooded through Rachel. Are you certain? I don't want to put you in danger. Preston's blue eyes met her steadily. I've faced worse than an angry drunk with delusions of manhood, Mrs. Norton. Something in his tone made Rachel believe him. Just Rachel, please, she said, and I accept your offer gratefully. But I insist on helping while I'm here. I can't just sit idle while you work. Preston seemed about to argue but then nodded. Fair enough, but nothing too strenuous until you've got your full strength back. They settled into an unexpected routine over the next few days. Preston would rise at dawn to tend to the livestock, while Rachel prepared breakfast and cared for William. During the day, while Preston worked the ranch, Rachel kept the house, doing laundry, preparing meals, and starting a small kitchen garden with seedlings Preston had been meaning to plant. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, William nestled between them as they talked. Preston told her about growing up on the ranch with his parents and 3 siblings, about losing his father to pneumonia 5 years earlier and his mother to heartbreak not long after. His sisters had married and moved to town, while his brother had headed to California seeking gold. It's just me now, he admitted one night, the firelight playing across his features. I never minded the solitude before, but lately. He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. It gets lonely, Rachel finished for him. I understand that. Preston nodded, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary before returning to the fire. What about you? He asked. Before Vernon, I mean, Rachel sighed, bouncing William gently on her knee. I grew up in Billings. My father was a schoolteacher, my mother tended our home. They both died in a typhoid outbreak when I was 17. I went to live with my aunt, but she made it clear I was a burden. When Vernon began courting me, he seemed like salvation. She laughed bitterly. How wrong I was. Not your fault, Preston said firmly. Men like that, they're good at hiding their true nature until they have you trapped. Were you ever married? Rachel asked, curious about this kind, solitary man. A shadow crossed Preston's face. Engaged once during the war. I was young, barely 18 when I enlisted with the Union. Elizabeth and I planned to marry when I returned. He absently rubbed his left leg, the one with the limp. I took a Confederate bullet at Gettysburg. By the time I made it home, Elizabeth had married a banker who hadn't gone to fight. I'm sorry, Rachel said softly. Preston shrugged. It was a long time ago. I came west after that, started fresh. My father had always talked about Montana territory, so I headed here, worked odd jobs until I could afford this place. He smiled at William, who had dozed off against Rachel's shoulder. Things have a way of working out how they're meant to, I suppose. As the days passed, Rachel found herself watching Preston when he didn't notice. The careful way he handled tools, the gentleness he showed with the animals, the respect with which he treated her, all of it, was so different from what she had grown accustomed to with Vernon. She caught herself wondering what it might be like to stay, to build a life here with a man like Preston Thornton. But such thoughts were dangerous. She was still a married woman, still legally bound to Vernon, and Preston had offered her shelter out of kindness, not courtship. Besides, they had known each other barely a week. It was ridiculous to entertain such notions. On the 8th day of her stay, Rachel was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Her heart leaped into her throat as she snatched William from his basket and ran toward the barn where Preston was mending tack. "Preston," she called, her voice tight with fear. "Someone's coming." He was on his feet immediately, moving toward the barn door. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his pistol as he peered outside. Rachel pressed herself against the barn wall, clutching William close as she waited in terrified silence. After what felt like an eternity, Preston returned, his expression relieved. "It's just my sister Margaret and her husband," he explained. "They often ride out on Sundays to check on me." Relief washed over Rachel, followed quickly by anxiety. What will they think of me being here?" Preston's eyes softened. "Maggie's got a good heart. She'll understand once I explain." He hesitated, then added, "But perhaps we should keep the details of your marriage private for now. Just say you're a widow passing through needing work. It might be safer that way." Rachel nodded gratefully. The fewer people who knew about Vernon, the better. Margaret Thornton Turner proved to be a younger, feminine version of her brother, with the same striking blue eyes and direct manner. Her husband, Robert, was a quiet man who seemed content to let his wife lead the conversation. "Well, Preston," Margaret said after introductions had been made and the initial awkwardness had passed, "I can't say I'm not surprised to find you've hired help, especially such young help with a baby in tow." Preston cleared his throat. "Rachel's been a godsend, Maggie. The place hasn't been this well kept since Mother was alive." Margaret's sharp eyes missed nothing as she observed the way Preston's gaze lingered on Rachel, or how Rachel seemed to instinctively move closer to him when she felt uncertain. "How long will you be staying, Mrs. Norton?" Margaret asked directly. "Just until I've saved enough to continue to Helena," Rachel replied, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "My cousin lives there." Margaret nodded slowly. "I see, and your husband?" Rachel tensed, but Preston smoothly intervened. "Rachel's a widow, Maggie. William's father died before he was born." A flash of sympathy crossed Margaret's face. "I'm so sorry for your loss, my dear. How difficult that must be, raising a child alone." The genuine kindness in her voice nearly broke Rachel's composure. "Thank you," she managed. "It hasn't been easy, but we're managing." After that, the conversation flowed more naturally. Margaret helped Rachel prepare lunch while the men discussed ranch business, and by the time the Turners prepared to leave, Rachel felt she had made a friend. As they were mounting their horses, Margaret took Rachel aside. "My brother is a good man," she said quietly. "The best I know. Whatever your story truly is, and I suspect it's more complicated than Preston let on, you could do far worse than to trust him with it." Rachel blushed. "It's not like that between us, Mrs. Turner." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Perhaps not yet, but I haven't seen Preston look at anyone the way he looks at you since before the war." She squeezed Rachel's hand. "Just know that you're welcome here, dear. Any friend of Preston's is family to us." After the Turners had departed, a new awareness seemed to hover between Rachel and Preston. That evening, as they sat by the fire, William asleep in his cradle nearby, Preston finally broke the comfortable silence. "I'm sorry about the lie," he said, "about you being a widow." Rachel shook her head. "It was necessary, and in some ways it's not entirely untrue. The man I married is gone, if he ever really existed at all." Preston studied her in the firelight. "You know," he said slowly, "in the eyes of the law, a man who abandons or endangers his family can forfeit his rights as a husband and father." Hope fluttered in Rachel's chest, quickly tempered by reality. "Perhaps, but that would require a judge willing to rule against a white man in favor of his wife. Such things are rare, Preston." "Not as rare as you might think, not out here," Preston countered. "The territorial judge who rides circuit through these parts is a fair man. Judge Hollister lost his own daughter to a violent husband. He might be sympathetic to your situation." Rachel stared into the flames, afraid to nurture the spark of possibility his words kindled. Even if that were true, Vernon would have to be served papers. There would be a hearing. "He would find us long before then." Preston leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What if we could keep you safe until then? What if you didn't have to run anymore?" Rachel asked, her heart beating faster at the intensity in his blue eyes. "Rachel," Preston began, then seemed to lose his nerve. "Forgive me, I'm speaking out of turn." "No," she said softly. "Please tell me what you're thinking." He took a deep breath. "I'm thinking that in the short time you've been here, this place has felt more like a home than it has in years. I'm thinking that William deserves to grow up somewhere safe with people who cherish him." His voice dropped lower. "And I'm thinking that I've never met anyone quite like you, and the thought of you leaving ties my stomach in knots." Rachel felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Preston." "I'm not proposing anything improper," he hastened to add. "Just stay, at least until we can consult with Judge Hollister when he next comes through. Let me help you fight this battle properly, not by running." The offer was tempting more than tempting. In just over a week, Preston Thornton had shown her more kindness, more respect than Vernon had in their entire marriage. And there was something else growing between them, something neither had dared name yet, but which hummed in the air whenever their eyes met. "What about your reputation?" Rachel asked practically. "People will talk if I stay here without a proper reason." Preston considered this. "You could be my housekeeper officially. We can set up the small cabin out back for you and William. It needs some work, but it would give you your own space and satisfy propriety." It was a reasonable solution, and Rachel found herself nodding. "All right, until Judge Hollister comes through, but I insist on earning my keep properly." Preston's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The next day, they began clearing out the small cabin that had originally been built for ranch hands. It was a simple one-room structure with a small stove, a bed frame, and little else. But Preston worked tirelessly to make it comfortable, repairing the roof, sealing drafts, and building a small cradle for William that mimicked the Thornton family one in the main house. Rachel, for her part, sewed curtains from fabric Margaret sent from town, planted flowers by the doorway, and transformed the humble space into a cozy haven. By the time they finished, 2 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, the cabin felt like a home, her first real home since leaving her parents' house years before. As spring deepened into summer, Rachel and William settled into life at the Thornton Ranch. Rachel took over the household management, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the kitchen garden, which flourished under her care. Preston taught her to ride, something Vernon had never allowed, and she discovered a freedom in galloping across the meadows that made her feel truly alive for the first time in years. William thrived in the clean mountain air, growing stronger and more alert every day. He began to sit up on his own, and the first time he laughed a delighted gurgle when Preston played peek-a-boo with him, both adults had stared at each other in shared wonder. "He's never done that before," Rachel had whispered, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "He's happy here," Preston had replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You both are, I hope." "Yes," Rachel had admitted, "happier than I can remember being," but beneath their growing contentment lay a current of anxiety. Vernon was still out there somewhere, and the longer Rachel stayed in one place, the greater the chance he would eventually find her. Preston had made discreet inquiries in town, learning that a man matching Vernon's description had been asking questions in Billings about a woman and baby. But the trail seemed to have gone cold near the creek where Rachel had crossed to throw him off. Judge Hollister wasn't due in the area for at least another month, according to the latest information from the sheriff. Until then, all they could do was remain vigilant and prepare for the legal battle ahead. One evening in early July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, William asleep in his basket between them, Preston finally gave voice to what had been growing between them. "I care for you, Rachel," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant peaks. "More than I thought possible after such a short time. I know your situation is complicated, and I would never press you for anything you're not ready or able to give, but I wanted you to know." Rachel's heart swelled with emotions too complex to name. "I care for you too," she replied softly. "And that terrifies me, Preston. Vernon. He made me doubt my own judgment, my own worth. What if I'm wrong again?" Preston turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're not wrong about me, Rachel. I promise you that. I would die before I raised a hand to you or William in anger. But I understand your caution, and I respect it." He offered a small smile. "I can wait as long as it takes." Rachel reached across the space between them, taking his calloused hand in hers. It was the first time she had initiated such contact, and she felt him start slightly in surprise before his fingers gently curled around hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, their joined hands a bridge across the pain of the past and the uncertainty of the future. The peace of that evening seemed to mark a turning point. Though Rachel still maintained her separate residence in the cabin, she and Preston grew closer with each passing day. They worked side by side on ranch chores, ate their meals together, and in the evenings, Preston would read aloud from one of his books while Rachel sewed or mended by lamplight, William playing on a quilt at their feet. It was a simple life, but one filled with a quiet joy that neither had expected to find. Even the ranch seemed to prosper under their combined care, the crops growing taller, the animals healthier, as if the land itself approved of their partnership. Margaret and Robert visited regularly, bringing supplies from town and news of the outside world. Margaret had taken an immediate liking to William, often bringing him small gifts, a wooden toy, a knitted cap for the coming winter, and offering Rachel the female companionship she had sorely missed. "You've been good for my brother," Margaret confided during one such visit, as they picked beans in the garden while the men repaired a fence in the north pasture. "I haven't seen him this happy since before the war," Rachel blushed, focusing on the task at hand. "He's been good for us too." "I don't know what would have happened if William and I hadn't found this place." Margaret gave her a knowing look. "It's more than gratitude I see in your eyes when you look at him, Rachel Norton." "It's complicated," Rachel sighed, "until my situation with Vernon is resolved." "Of course," Margaret agreed. "But after? Have you thought about what comes next?" Rachel had thought of little else, especially in the quiet of night when William slept and she was alone with her dreams. Dreams of a future here, of William growing up strong and confident under Preston's guidance, of building a life with a man who treated her as an equal partner rather than a possession. "I don't want to presume," she told Margaret. Preston has been kind, but Margaret's laugh interrupted her. "Kind, my dear, my brother is completely smitten with you. Surely you've noticed," Rachel's blush deepened. "Perhaps, but until I'm legally free." "Understood," Margaret said, patting her hand. "Just know that when that day comes, you'll have our family's blessing." The conversation left Rachel both hopeful and anxious. The feelings growing between her and Preston were undeniable, but the shadow of Vernon Blackwood still loomed over any future they might build together. That shadow materialized one scorching August afternoon, nearly 3 months after Rachel had first sought shelter in Preston's chicken coop. Preston had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Rachel and William at the ranch with strict instructions to stay close to the house and keep the shotgun nearby. Rachel was hanging laundry in the yard, singing softly to William, who lay on a blanket in the shade of an apple tree, when she heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching horse. Thinking Preston had returned early, she turned with a smile that froze on her face as she recognized the rider. Vernon Blackwood sat astride a lathered horse, his face red with sun and drink, his eyes blazing with a familiar rage as he spotted her. Rachel's blood turned to ice as she instinctively moved to shield William from his father's view. "There you are, you faithless whore," Vernon snarled, dismounting with a stumbling gait that revealed his intoxication. "Took me long enough to track you down." Rachel's mind raced. The shotgun was inside the house, too far to reach before Vernon could intercept her. Her only advantage was that he was drunk and unsteady on his feet. "Vernon," she said, struggling to keep her voice calm. "How did you find us?" He laughed, an ugly sound that made her skin crawl. "Heard talk in town about a pretty young widow with a baby staying out at the Thornton place." Didn't take much to put it together. His bloodshot eyes narrowed. "So this is where you've been hiding, playing house with another man while still wearing my ring." "It's not like that," Rachel protested, though she knew explanations were useless when Vernon was in this state. "Mr. Thornton has been kind enough to give me work and a place to stay, nothing more," Vernon sneered, taking a step closer. "Don't lie to me, Rachel. I know what women like you are after." His hand moved to his belt where a knife gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Where's my son?" "I've come to take what's mine." William chose that moment to let out a cry, drawing Vernon's attention to the blanket beneath the tree. Rachel's heart nearly stopped as Vernon started toward the baby, his intentions clear in his twisted expression. "No." She cried, lunging forward to place herself between Vernon and William. "You're not touching him." Vernon's back had caught her across the face with such force that she stumbled, tasting blood where her lip had split. "Don't tell me what I can and can't do with my own flesh and blood," he growled, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Rachel fought like a cornered wildcat, scratching, kicking, doing anything to keep Vernon from reaching William, whose cries had escalated to frightened screams. In their struggle, they knocked over the laundry basket, sending clean sheets tumbling into the dirt. Vernon's superior strength was winning out when the sound of a rifle being cocked froze them both. "Let her go," Preston's voice rang out, cold and deadly as winter steel. He stood at the edge of the yard, his rifle aimed squarely at Vernon's chest, his blue eyes blazing with a fury Rachel had never seen in them before. Vernon's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't release Rachel. "This isn't your business, mister," he slurred. "This is between me and my wife. When you put your hands on a woman in anger on my property, you make it my business," Preston replied, his aim never wavering. "Now I won't ask again. Let her go." Something in Preston's tone must have penetrated Vernon's alcohol-fogged brain because he abruptly shoved Rachel away from him. She stumbled but kept her feet, immediately rushing to scoop up William, who was red-faced and screaming in terror. "This woman is my lawful wife," Vernon declared, straightening to his full height. "And that's my son she's carrying. I've come to take them home where they belong." Preston's expression didn't change as he moved closer, the rifle still trained on Vernon's chest. "The law doesn't give you the right to beat your wife, Blackwood, nor does it allow you to threaten a child." Vernon's eyes widened slightly at the use of his name. "You know who I am." "I've made it my business to know," Preston replied coldly. "Just as I've made it my business to document every bruise, every threat you've made against Rachel and William. Judge Hollister will be very interested in my testimony and that of the doctor who examined Rachel when she first arrived here." This was news to Rachel, who stared at Preston in surprise. She had never visited a doctor, but she realized Preston was bluffing, trying to make Vernon believe there was official documentation of his abuse. Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You think some territorial judge is going to take the word of a woman and her lover over a husband's rights?" He spat on the ground. "Rachel's coming home with me and so is my son, and if you try to stop me, I'll kill you." In a lightning-fast movement, Vernon reached for the pistol at his hip, but Preston was faster. The rifle cracked, and Vernon howled as the bullet tore through his shoulder, sending his gun flying from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Next one goes through your heart," Preston said calmly, working the lever to chamber another round. "Unless you get on your horse and ride away. Now." Vernon clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face pale beneath its sunburn as he glared at Preston with naked hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll be back with the law. You do that," Preston replied evenly. "I'm sure the sheriff would be very interested to hear about the 3 men you killed in Billings and the bank you robbed in Bozeman." Vernon's eyes widened in genuine fear, and Rachel realized Preston had been doing more than just making casual inquiries in town. He had been building a case against Vernon, gathering information that could be used to protect her and William. Without another word, Vernon staggered to his horse and managed to haul himself into the saddle, leaving a trail of blood drops in the dust. As he turned his mount toward the road, he fixed Rachel with a final, venomous glare. "This isn't over," he repeated, then dug his heels into the horse's flanks and galloped away. The moment he was out of sight, Preston lowered the rifle and rushed to Rachel's side. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his free hand gently touching her swelling cheek. Rachel shook her head, though her split lip throbbed painfully. "We're all right," she assured him, though she couldn't stop trembling. "But Preston, those things you said about Vernon, about the doctor." "Some true, some not," Preston admitted. "I did learn that Vernon is wanted for questioning in connection with a saloon fight that left 2 men dead, And there's a description matching his at a bank robbery in Bozeman, though no positive identification. He sighed, setting the rifle aside to take William from her arms, soothing the baby with practiced ease. As for the doctor, that was a bluff. I'm sorry if it confused you. It was brilliant, Rachel breathed, astonished by his foresight. But he'll be back, Preston, I know Vernon. He won't let this go. Preston's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready for him. But first, let's get you both inside and tend to that lip. As Preston gently cleaned her split lip with a damp cloth, his touch so careful it brought tears to her eyes, Rachel tried to process what had happened. Vernon had found them, had tried to take William, and would certainly try again. The fragile peace she had built at the Thornton ranch was shattered. I should leave, she said suddenly, pulling away from Preston's ministrations. As long as we stay here, we're putting you in danger. Preston's hand stilled, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. Running isn't the answer, Rachel. It never was. Vernon will just keep hunting you, and sooner or later he'll catch up again, perhaps somewhere without anyone to help you. But he could have killed you. Rachel protested, the thought making her heart constrict painfully. Preston's smile was grim. He could have tried. I've faced worse than Vernon Blackwood and lived to tell about it. His expression softened as he looked at William, who had finally calmed and was now dozing against his chest. Besides, I made a promise to keep you both safe. I intend to honor that promise. Why? Rachel whispered, the question that had been in her heart for months finally finding voice. Why risk so much for us? Preston was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Because from the moment I found you hiding in my chicken coop, something changed in me, he said finally, his voice low and intense. All these years since the war, I've been half alive, just going through the motions, but you and William, you brought light back into this place, into my life. He took a deep breath. I love you, Rachel, both of you, and I'll fight for you as long as there's breath in my body. The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Rachel felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from pain this time, but from a fierce joy that threatened to overwhelm her. I love you too, she admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. I think I have almost from the beginning, but I was too afraid to trust it, to trust myself. Preston's smile then was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. With William still cradled in one arm, he reached for Rachel with the other, drawing her gently to his side. With infinite tenderness, mindful of her injured lip, he brushed his mouth against her forehead in a kiss that felt like a covenant. We'll face whatever comes together, he promised, starting with getting legal protection for you and William. That evening, after securing the house and property with extra vigilance, Preston outlined his plan. First thing in the morning, he would ride to town and wire Judge Hollister, requesting an emergency hearing. He would also alert the sheriff about Vernon's appearance and threats. In the meantime, he said, checking the loads in his rifle before placing it by the door, I think you and William should stay in the main house with me. The cabin's too isolated if Vernon returns with friends. Rachel nodded, grateful for his foresight. They prepared a pallet for William near the fireplace in the main room, and Preston insisted Rachel take his bed again while he kept watch from a chair by the window. Despite her exhaustion, Rachel found sleep elusive. Her mind kept replaying Vernon's appearance, the hatred in his eyes, the violence of his hands. But each time fear threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered Preston's words, I love you. I'll fight for you as long as there's breath in my body. In the gray light of dawn, she finally dozed off, only to be awakened a few hours later by the sound of horses approaching. For a terrifying moment, she thought Vernon had returned with reinforcements, but Preston's calm demeanor as he peered out the window reassured her. It's Robert and Maggie, he reported, relief evident in his voice. And Sheriff Mills is with them. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sheriff Mills, a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican and Civil Wars, took Rachel's statement with surprising gentleness, his weathered face darkening with anger as she detailed Vernon's history of abuse. This sort of thing burns my hide, he growled, making notes in a small book. A man who raises his hand to his wife and child is no man at all in my book. Margaret had brought fresh clothes for Rachel and William, as well as food and medical supplies. She clucked over Rachel's bruised face like a mother hen, applying arnica salve to reduce the swelling. Preston sent word about what happened, she explained as she worked. Robert and I came as soon as we got his message. We're not leaving you to face this alone. The sheriff, meanwhile, was in deep conversation with Preston and Robert on the porch. Rachel could see them through the window, their expressions grave as they discussed strategy. When they came inside, Sheriff Mills addressed Rachel directly. "Mrs. Norton, I've sent a deputy to watch the roads for your husband. If he shows his face in town, we'll arrest him for assault. In the meantime, I've telegraphed Judge Hollister. He's in Helena now but says he can be here within the week for an emergency hearing." Hope rose in Rachel's chest. "And can he grant you a divorce and full custody of your son?" Sheriff Mills finished for her. "Based on what you've told me, and with witnesses to yesterday's assault, I'd say your chances are very good. Hollister doesn't tolerate men who abuse their families." "Vernon will contest it," Rachel said, her hope tempered by years of experience with her husband's determination. "He'll claim his rights as a husband and father." "Let him try," Robert spoke up, his usually quiet demeanor replaced by firm resolve. "Between Preston's testimony, yours, and the sheriff's report, no judge in the territory would side with him." Preston, who had been silently watching Rachel throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "There's something else to consider," he said carefully. "The charges against Vernon in Billings and Bozeman. If those are proven, he could be facing prison time, which would make the divorce proceedings much simpler." Sheriff Mills nodded. "I've sent telegrams to both jurisdictions. If they can positively identify Blackwood, we'll have more than enough to hold him regardless of the outcome of your case, Mrs. Norton." For the first time since Vernon's appearance, Rachel allowed herself to believe that freedom might truly be possible, legal freedom that would allow her to build a new life without constantly looking over her shoulder. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Preston insisted that someone armed remain with Rachel and William at all times. He, Robert, and 2 ranch hands that Robert had brought from town took turns patrolling the property, while Margaret stayed close to Rachel, providing comfort and practical support. Word came from Sheriff Mills that Vernon had been spotted in a saloon in a neighboring town, his wounded shoulder roughly bandaged, drinking heavily and making threats against Preston. The sheriff had sent deputies to apprehend him, but Vernon had fled before they arrived. "He's still out there then," Rachel said when Preston relayed this news, fear knotting her stomach despite the protection surrounding her. "But injured, drunk, and on the run," Preston pointed out. "Not in any condition to cause trouble. And with the law looking for him now, his options are limited." Judge Hollister arrived on the 4th day after Vernon's appearance, a tall, gaunt man with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense to the truth beneath. He conducted an informal hearing at the sheriff's office in town, listening with grave attention as Rachel recounted her marriage to Vernon, the escalating abuse, and the events that had led to her flight with William. Preston testified next, describing the condition Rachel had been in when he found her, the terror in her eyes, and Vernon's violent appearance at the ranch. Sheriff Mills presented the evidence he had gathered about Vernon's other criminal activities, including positive identification from witnesses to the saloon fight in Billings. When all testimony had been given, Judge Hollister removed his spectacles and addressed Rachel directly. "Mrs. Norton, based on the evidence presented, I find ample grounds to grant you a temporary order of protection, full temporary custody of your son, and to initiate divorce proceedings against Vernon Blackwood." Rachel's heart soared, but the judge raised a cautionary finger. "However, the law requires that your husband be properly served with papers and given the opportunity to respond. Given his current whereabouts are unknown, this presents a challenge." "Your Honor," Sheriff Mills interjected, "under territorial statute, public notification can be substituted for personal service if the respondent is deliberately evading legal process." Judge Hollister nodded approvingly. "Precisely what I was about to suggest, Sheriff. We will publish the required notices in newspapers across the territory. If Blackwood fails to appear for the hearing in 30 days, the divorce and custody orders will be granted by default. And in the meantime, Preston asked, his hand finding Rachel's beneath the table. In the meantime, the judge replied, his stern face softening slightly as he observed their clasped hands, Mrs. Norton and her child remain under the protection of this court. Any attempt by Vernon Blackwood to approach them will result in his immediate arrest. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Rachel felt lighter than she had in years. Though the danger from Vernon wasn't entirely past, for the first time she had the law firmly on her side, and a future without fear seemed possible. What happens after the divorce is final. She asked Preston as they sat on the porch that night, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. Preston took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. That depends on what you want, Rachel. You'll be free to go wherever you choose, do whatever you wish. And if I wish to stay, she asked softly, gathering her courage. Here with you, the hope that bloomed in Preston's eyes was answer enough, but he spoke the words she longed to hear anyway. Nothing would make me happier. I meant what I said before I love you and William. I want to build a life with you both, if you'll have me. Rachel's answer was to lean forward and press her lips gently to his, their first true kiss, filled with promise and possibility. When they parted, both were smiling, the future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky wide open and full of light. The required 30 days passed without any sign of Vernon, though rumors placed him in various locations throughout the territory, always a step ahead of the law. Judge Hollister, true to his word, granted Rachel's divorce and gave her full legal custody of William, restoring her maiden name of Norton, which she had always preferred to Blackwood anyway. The day the final papers arrived was cause for celebration. Margaret and Robert came from town with a small cake, and even Sheriff Mills rode out to offer his congratulations and to assure Rachel that the search for Vernon continued, though it had become a lower priority now that she was legally protected from him. That evening, after their guests had departed and William was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Preston led Rachel to the porch where they had shared so many conversations over the months of her stay. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke as Preston took both her hands in his. Rachel's heart quickened at the solemn joy in his expression. "Rachel Norton," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes, "when you appeared in my chicken coop with William that night, I thought I was rescuing you. But the truth is, you rescued me from a loneliness I'd stopped noticing because it had become so familiar." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden box. "This was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "My father made it for her from the first gold he panned when they came west, and the pearl was a gift from a grateful family she nursed through influenza." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as Preston knelt before her, the ring held between them like a promise. "I'm asking if you'll make this house a home again, if you'll allow me to be a father to William, and if you'll do me the great honor of becoming my wife." For a moment, Rachel could only look at him through her tears, this good, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her and William, who had shown her what true love looked like in daily acts of kindness and respect. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed through her tears as she repeated more firmly, "Yes, Preston Thornton, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face rivaled the sunrise for brilliance as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, a commitment born of shared struggles and hard-won trust. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Margaret as Rachel's attendant and Robert standing as Preston's best man. William, resplendent in a new suit Margaret had sewn for the occasion, gurgled happily in Judge Hollister's arms as the older man, who had delayed his circuit to perform the ceremony, pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Thornton," the judge declared with a rare smile. Preston needed no second invitation, drawing Rachel close for a kiss that spoke of devotion, partnership, and a future built on mutual respect and love. The reception at the Turners' home afterward was a joyous affair, with neighbors and friends gathering to celebrate the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. Rachel, wearing a simple cream dress that Margaret had helped her make, felt beautiful in a way Vernon's expensive gifts had never made her feel, treasured for herself rather than as a possession. As they danced to the music of a local fiddler, Preston held her close, his voice low in her ear. "Happy Mrs. Thornton, more than I ever dreamed possible," she replied truthfully, savoring the sound of her new name, freely chosen this time. They returned to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, William sleeping peacefully in Rachel's arms as Preston carried them both across the threshold in a gesture that made her laugh with delight. "Welcome home," he said simply, setting her gently on her feet in the main room where a fire blazed welcome in the hearth. "Home," Rachel repeated, the word filled with meaning as she looked around the house that had sheltered her in her darkest hour and would now witness her greatest joy. Later, after William had been settled in his cradle, now permanently installed in what had become the nursery, Rachel and Preston lay together in the large bed that was now theirs to share. The intimacy between them, built on months of growing trust and respect, blossomed into a physical expression of their love that left them both breathless with wonder. "I never knew it could be like this," Rachel confessed afterward, nestled in the safe harbor of Preston's arms. That love could feel like freedom rather than captivity. Preston kissed her forehead, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "That's what true love is, Rachel, not possession but partnership, not control but support," she smiled, pressing closer to his warmth. "You've taught me that, Preston Thornton, you and this place." As Rachel drifted towards sleep, contentment filling her like golden light, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From terror in a chicken coop to joy in a marriage bed, from a woman fleeing for her life to one standing firmly on her own 2 feet, choosing her own path. Vernon Blackwood was eventually apprehended trying to cross into Canada, convicted of multiple charges including assault and bank robbery, and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The news brought Rachel not vengeance but closure, the final chapter in a book she had already set aside to begin a new story. That story unfolded over the years with chapters of joy, challenge, and deepening love. William grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy who followed Preston around the ranch, absorbing lessons in both ranching and manhood from the only father he would ever acknowledge. When he was 5, he gained a sister, Elizabeth Margaret Thornton, named for Preston's lost love and the sister who had become Rachel's dearest friend. 2 years later, twins Robert and Rose joined the family, completing the Thornton brood and filling the once quiet ranch house with laughter, occasional tears, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Through it all, Rachel and Preston maintained the partnership forged in those early days of danger and trust. They worked the ranch together, shared the raising of their children, and weathered the inevitable storms of life secure in the knowledge that they faced them together. On the 10th anniversary of the night Rachel had sought shelter in the chicken coop, Preston surprised her with a gift, a small golden brooch in the shape of a hen, studded with tiny pearls. "To commemorate where our story began," he explained as she admired it in the lamplight, their children asleep upstairs after a day of celebration. "The most valuable chicken coop in all of Montana, as far as I'm concerned." Rachel laughed, leaning against his shoulder as they sat together on the porch swing that had replaced the old chairs years ago. "Who would have thought that the most terrifying night of my life would lead to all this happiness?" Preston wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close as they gazed out at the ranch that had flourished under their joint care, at the home they had built together. "Sometimes the darkest nights lead us to the brightest dawns," he said softly. "I thank God every day that you found your way to me, Rachel Norton Thornton." "And I thank God that you were the one who found me," Rachel replied, turning to kiss him beneath the vast Montana sky, where stars shone like promises kept and dreams fulfilled. In the distance, a lone coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley like a reminder of the wildness they had tamed together, not by conquering it, but by finding their place within it just as they had found their place with each other, creating a love as enduring as the mountains and as nurturing as the fertile land they called home.